Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. It was supposed to be a routine day in Central City, one of those uneventful stretches where Barry Allen could feel good about the life he had built for himself. As the Flash protector of the city, he had done his part. The streets were safer, villains were either behind bars or scared out of sight, and people felt secure under his watchful eye. That morning, Barry had zipped around the city at top speed, saving people from car crashes, muggings, and even the occasional petty thief. The constant hum of the city-sized life whirled around him as he dashed from place to place, often unseen by anyone but the most observant. To the average Central City citizen, the Flash was an unseen force of nature, always there, always saving the day. But everything changed in the blink of an eye. It began as just another crisis, a runaway train barreling down the tracks, brakes shot, heading straight toward a densely populated area of the city. Barry didn't hesitate. He sprinted to the scene, feeling the familiar surge of electricity in his veins as he tapped into the speed force. He was confident, almost relaxed, as he approached the train at breakneck speed. Just another day at the office, he thought. But as he neared the train, something went horribly wrong. A miscalculation, just a fraction of a second off, and instead of stopping the train, his sudden velocity created an unexpected force. The carriages buckled, the engine jolted, and the entire train lurched off the rail. Metal screeched and crumpled like a paper bag as the train careened into a nearby building. Debris flew through the air like shrapnel, raining down on the streets below. Barry, his heart pounded in his chest. He moved quickly, darting through the chaos, pulling civilians from the wreckage as fast as his legs could carry him. His hands shook, his breath coming in ragged gasps. No matter how many people he saved, it wasn't tiring enough. He couldn't save them all. In the aftermath, the scene was horrific. The shattered remains of the train lay scattered across the block. The building's facade partially collapsed. Injured civilians screamed for help, and worst of all, there were bodies too many. Barry stood in the middle of the destruction, his red suit covered in dust and grime. He could still hear the wailing of sirens, the distant cries of the wounded, and the heart-wrenching silence of the dead. His vision blurred, not from exhaustion, but from the tears welling up in his eyes. This was his fault. For the first time in his career as the Flash, Barry Allen was paralyzed with guilt. He stared at the wreckage, his mind numb. How had he miscalculated so badly? How had he caused this? He barely noticed the gathering crowd or the news helicopters buzzing overhead. His mind was spiraling, the weight of the catastrophe settling over him like a suffocating blanket. The cheers of gratitude he was used to hearing after a successful rescue were nowhere to be found. In their place were murmurs of confusion and disbelief. How could the Flash let this happen? Barry turned, his legs moving on their own, and disappeared in a blur. He couldn't face them. He couldn't face anyone. Days passed, but the guilt didn't fade. It gnawed at him, a constant companion that followed him everywhere. Barry stopped responding to calls for help. He avoided his friends and his duties. Even his job at the Central City Police Department felt like a burden. Everywhere he went, he saw reminders of his failure, the headlines in the papers, the whispers on the streets, the footage of the train crash playing on a loop on every news channel. He shut himself in his apartment, staring at the walls, his mind replaying the accident over and over again. Each time the train crashed and each time people died, he could still hear their screams. The Flash was supposed to save lives, not end them. The guilt ate away at him, and soon Barry began to wonder if he should even continue being the Flash. Maybe Central City didn't need him. Maybe he was more dangerous than he realized. The knock on his door startled him. He hadn't been expecting anyone, and he certainly wasn't in the mood for company. Ignoring it seemed like the easiest option, but the knock came again, more insistent this time. With a sigh, Barry dragged himself to the door and opened it. Barry, a deep, familiar voice said. It was Bruce Wayne, dressed in civilian clothes, but with the same imposing presence he carried as Batman. Bruce stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Barry blinked, surprised. Bruce, what are you doing here? Bruce didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped inside without waiting for an invitation and closed the door behind him. His eyes scanned the apartment, taking in the mess, the discarded food containers, the empty bottles of water. He said nothing, but his silence was judgment enough. We need to talk, Bruce finally said, his voice calm but firm. Barry sighed. running a hand through his disheveled hair. He didn't want to talk. He didn't want to do anything, especially not with Bruce. I am not in the mood, Bruce, Barry muttered, turning away from him. I didn't ask if you were, Bruce replied, his voice unyielding. I came because you were spiraling. You need to get out of your own head before you do something stupid. Barry flinched at the words. It wasn't the first time Bruce had been brutally honest with him, but this time it hit harder than usual, maybe because it was true. I screwed up, Bruce, Barry said, his voice barely above a whisper. People died because of me. I can't get past that. Bruce nodded slowly, as if he expected this. You made a mistake, it happened. A mistake? Barry's sound voice rose, frustration bubbling to the surface. This wasn't just some small mistake, Bruce. People died. Do you get that? Bruce's eyes narrowed slightly, his expression hardening. I get it. Barry, more than you know, but you don't have the luxury of wallowing in guilt. You're a hero. You have a responsibility to this city, to these people. I thought I was helping them, Barry whispered, sinking onto the couch, his head in his hands. But I hurt them. I don't know if I can keep doing this. Bruce sat down across from him, his gaze unwavering. Being a hero isn't about being perfect. It's about getting back up after you fall. It's about owning your mistakes and doing better. If you let this break you, then you were letting them down even more. Barry did he respond? He couldn't. The weight of his failure still pressed down on him, suffocating, relentless. Bruce leaned forward, his voice lowering. I've made mistakes too, Barry. Big ones. I've lost people I cared about, but I didn't quit. You don't get to quit either. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and undeniable. Barry felt them sinking into his bones, stirring something deep within him. But the guilt still held him in its grip, refusing to let go. I don't know if I am strong enough, Barry admitted, his voice small, broken. Bruce stood, his eyes never leaving Barry. So you are, and I am going to prove it to you. Before Barry could protest, Bruce grabbed his arm and pulled him to his feet. Come with me there. Something you need to see. Barry hesitated, but allowed Bruce to lead him out the door. He didn't know where they were going, but maybe Bruce had a point. Maybe it was time to stop running. Bruce drove in silence, the hum of the engine the only sound between them. Barry stared out the window, his mind racing as they cut through the streets of Central City. The city looked different. Now the vibrant life he used to protect seemed distant, like he was seeing it through a pane of frosted glass. He couldn't shake the thought that it would be better off without him. Bruce hadn't said a word since they left Barry's apartment, and that only made Barry more anxious. He had no idea where they were going or what Bruce had planned, but something told him it wasn't going to be easy. Finally, they pulled up to the wreckage. The train crash site was still cordoned off, though the cleanup was already underway. Workers in reflective vests moved through the debris, and the sound of construction echoed faintly in the distance. The twisted remains of the train lay like a skeleton across the city block, a grim reminder of the disaster. Barry's stomach twisted at the sight. His instinct was to run, to get away from this place, and the memories it stirred, but Bruce's hand on his shoulder kept him grounded. They stepped out of the car, and Barry's feet felt like lead as they approached the wreckage. Why did you bring me here? Barry asked, his voice barely audible. Because you need to face it, Bruce said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Running from this one help you can hide from your mistakes, Barry. Barry swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on the mangled metal in front of him. His breath came in shallow, uneven bursts as the memories of that day flooded back. The screams, the blood, the helplessness. He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palm. I can, Barry whispered. I can do this, Bruce. Yes, you can, Bruce replied, his voice steady. You were not the first hero to make a mistake, and you won't be the last. The difference between heroes and everyone else is that we don't get to give up when things get hard. Barry shook his head, his chest tight. This wasn't just hard, Bruce. People died. Because of me. I know, Bruce said, his voice softening just enough to show he understood, but you were not the only one carrying that weight. Barry looked at him confused. What do you mean? Bruce gestured toward the wreckage. Come on there. Something I want you to see. Reluctantly, Barry followed him as they walked through the remains of the train. Barry noticed a group of people gathered near the edge of the site. Some were wearing black, their faces drawn with grief. Others held flowers or candles, quietly mourning the lives lost in the accident. They were the families of the victims, Bruce said quietly. Barry stopped in his tracks, his heart pounding. He hadn't expected this. Seeing the families, their pain, their loss, it was like a punch to the gut. His instinct was to turn around, to flee, but Bruce's hand on his back pushed him forward. You need to face them. Barry not as the Flash, as Barry Allen. I don't know if I can, Barry said, his voice shaking. You can, Bruce said firmly. You owe it to them. With a deep breath, Barry approached the group. His legs felt weak and his chest tightened with every step. He wanted to say something, to offer some kind of apology, but the words caught in his throat. One of the women noticed him first. Her eyes widened in recognition, and she turned to the others, her voice hushed but urgent. Soon, the entire group was looking at him, and Barry could feel the weight of their stares pressing down on him. Barry began, but his voice faltered. I am so sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. The woman who had first noticed him stepped forward. She was older, with graying hair and deep lines etched into her face. Her eyes were red from crying, and she clutched a framed photo of a young man in her hand. My son, she said, her voice trembling. He was on that train. Barry's heart sank. He could barely meet her eyes, the guilt crushing him from the inside. I'm sorry, he whispered again, his voice cracking. The woman's expression was a mixture of pain and anger, but there was something else there, too. Something Barry hadn't expected, understanding. I don't blame you, she said quietly. You were trying to help. My son, he was always talking about how much he admired the Flash, he said. You were the reason he felt safe in the city. Barry blinked, stunned. He didn't know how to respond. This woman, this mother who had lost her son, was offering him something he didn't feel. He deserved forgiveness. I wish I could have saved him, Barry said, his voice thick with emotion. So do I, the woman replied, her eyes glistening with tears. But you've saved so many others. She stopped now. Barry felt a lump rise in his throat, and for the first time in days, the weight on his chest seemed to lift, if only a little. He hadn't expected this. Hadn't he expected forgiveness? Hadn't he expected understanding? But maybe there was a path forward. As the families began to drift away, leaving their tributes behind, Bruce placed a hand on Barry's son's shoulder. You were not alone in this, Bruce said quietly. None of us are. Barry nodded, still processing everything that had just happened. For so long, he had been carrying the guilt alone, drowning in it. But now, standing here with Bruce in front of the wreckage, he realized that he didn't have to carry it by himself. A few days later, a new threat emerged in Central City. Weather Wizard, one of the Flash-sized old enemies, had returned, and this time, he was intent on making a statement. The storm that descended on the city was unlike anything Barry had ever seen. Winds howled through the streets, and lightning crackled across the sky, striking buildings and sending debris flying. Barry had been watching the news reports from the sidelines, still unsure if he was ready to return as the Flash. But when he saw the destruction Weather Wizard was causing, something clicked inside him. It wasn't about him. It never had been. It was about the people. The ones who needed him, the ones who couldn't protect themselves. Bruce's words echoed in his mind. Being a hero isn't all about being perfect. It's all about getting back up after you fall. Barry stood, his heart racing, and in an instant, he was out the door, his suit crackling with energy as he sprinted toward the center of the storm. Weather Wizard stood atop a skyscraper, controlling the storm with the flick of his wrist, his eyes gleaming with madness. He spotted the Flash approaching and sneered. Back for more, are we? Weather Wizard taunted, raising his wand to unleash another wave of destruction. Barry gritted his teeth, his eyes narrowing as he charged forward. This time, there would be no hesitation, no self-doubt. He moved faster than ever before, dodging bolts of lightning and gusts of wind as he closed the distance between them. But Weather Wizard was ready with a flick of his wrist. He sent a bolt of lightning straight toward a nearby building, where dozens of civilians were trapped inside. Barry's heart stopped. This was it, his chance to make things right. In a blur of red, he raced toward the building, his body moving almost faster than his mind could process. He reached the building just as the lightning struck, using his speed to absorb the energy and divert it away from the civilian. The air crackled with electricity as Barry redirected the lightning into the sky, sparing the people inside. He didn't stop in the blink of an eye. He was back on top of the skyscraper, standing face to face with Weather Wizard. This ends now, Barry said. his voice low and steady. With a surge of speed, he disarmed Weather Wizard, knocking him to the ground and ending the storm with one final burst of energy. The skies cleared and the winds died down, leaving Central City in a strange, quiet calm. As the police arrived to take Weather Wizard into custody, Barry stood atop the skyscraper, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. He had done it. He had saved them. And this time, there were no mistakes. Bruce appeared beside him, his cape billowing in the wind. He didn't try to say anything, but the look in his eyes said it all. Barry had redeemed himself not just in the eyes of the city, but in his own. As they watched the sun begin to set over Central City, Barry felt something he hadn't felt in a long time.